In this video I'm going to share some thoughts and ideas about the Alamo Remembered. Differently from most of my video reviews, I'm not going to show you components and to talk about gameplay in detail in this video here, because I made another video for that. It is just that the turn structure of this game, I thought it would be clearer if I showed it and I played it as I was going through the explanation. So it was both explanation and sample turn at the same time. So I don't need to repeat the same things here. And in that video you can also take a good look at the components. So we can talk about other things in this video here. However, I'm going to try to make it in such a way that more or less you can get a general sense of what I think about this game, even if you haven't watched the other video. Of course, I suggested you do it because I made it just for you, so why not watch it? The Alamo Remembered. First thing, couple of things to say about the title. The title is peculiar because when you read the designer's note in the rulebook for this game, turns out that the designer doesn't really believe that this game captures the Alamo as it happened, the Battle of the Alamo. It is not so much a game about remembering the Alamo, but in a certain way imagining the Alamo, glorifying the Alamo, celebrating what the Alamo represents more than what the Alamo was. At least this is what the designer says. The designer says that according to some scholarship that he seems to endorse and agree with, turns out that that the defenders of the Alamo fell after the first attack, after the first enemy charge, not after a repeated series of charges, as the story has been told so far, as John Wayne has showed us, and other people in other movies too. I don't know enough about the history of the Alamo to take one side or the other, the multiple charges version or the single charge version. I'm telling you that it is interesting and peculiar that the designer says, no, I believe that there was a single charge, but in the game I'm showing you multiple charges because that makes the game more interesting. It lasts a little longer. It just turns out that actually the game may not have multiple charges. The Texian defender may just lose the Alamo at the end of the first charge, but the game will have up to 3 enemy charges in this version here. 1 to 2 player games. In the 2-player game, of course, one player will control the Texan defenders of the Alamo and the other player will control the Mexican attackers. In the 1-player game, in the solitaire game, the player controls the Texan units, and then there is an AI that will determine the behavior of the Mexican attackers. It is, in the 2-player version, pretty much a bluffing game. It is about sequence deployment of units for both players, and I guess that there is a lot there in which you can try to trick the opponent. In the solitaire version, things of course are not like that. The decisions that you have to make when you know that you are playing against an AI that has a very strict series of possible steps, well, the decisions that you have to make there are not a million of decisions. It is pretty much about reinforcing and moving units around and deployment at the beginning of the game. This is a general idea. Now, how does it work? How does it play? Definitely, this is a very light, very simple game. That, nevertheless, has a couple of steps that may take a while before you become familiar with them, before they become natural, before they become intuitive. I just found myself at the beginning of the game just going through the sequence of the turn, step by step, and executing things quite mechanically. In the 1-player game, one problem that I have is that the AI is pretty cumbersome. You have to do some math and crunch some numbers when the Mexican reinforcement phase arrives. If you survive until the end of turn 1, then you also have more math that you need to do at the beginning of turn 2, or possibly also the beginning of turn 3. When the Mexicans are reinforcing and redeploying. That is a little annoying. Now, it is not that you have to interrupt the game and crunch numbers for half an hour. It is that after a phase of, say, 2 minutes, then you do 3 minutes of mathematics, then you go back and you move something, resolve something. It just seems like for what the game is, for how short the game is, especially if you lose the game at the end of the first turn, then the game is probably 10 minutes or so. Half of that time, if not a little bit more, is set up, placing units on the board, determining how the Mexican units are placed at the beginning of the game, determining where the reinforcements arrive. My problem there is that there aren't enough decisions that you really have to make that give you the sense in the one-player game that you have any degree of control on the situation. Every game that I played, at the end of the first turn, there was always at least one section that the Mexicans could have breached if the reinforcements were sent to that section. Then you had to roll dice to determine the section that the Mexicans will reinforce each turn. So first you crunch numbers and you do math to determine the weakest ones. Then among those, one of them will receive reinforcements depending on the die roll. That die roll is really key. Really had the sense that a lot of the game, if not all of the game, is there. You get that die roll wrong, the Mexicans reinforce that one point of the wall, you've lost the game. Could there be ways in which you simply have everything safe? You do not even need to worry about rolling dice? Possibly. I still haven't seen it yet. It just seems to me that this game is supposed to be light, quick, fast, probably intuitive with some narrative in there, but the AI makes it a little cumbersome, and as I said, it kind of limits the enjoyment of the story between having to execute all of the steps that the Mexican AI asked me to perform, and then feeling that I did not have so many things that I could choose to do on the map, not so many resources that I could use. The narrative really struggled to come out. I didn't have much of a sense of narrative. I expected to move from a couple of games in which I would go through the steps of the sequence and then I would start seeing the story. What happened is that I became more familiar with the steps of the sequence, but the story still failed to emerge. As I said, this just means that I do not see this as a particularly elegant one-player game. As a solitaire game, I did not enjoy it very much. I could not warm up to it because of this. Too light on one hand and a little too procedural. Too light on story and decisions and too procedural in terms of mechanics. As a two-player game, I think it may work. I think it can be much more effective because then you have a bluffing game. Then you do not have to use any sort of complicated procedure. You simply add units here, add unit there, choose units of the opponent. You know that you're playing against a person that is trying to bluff against you, to outsmart you, so it is not just a random thing, but you know that there is something there that you're trying to do. There can be fun moments when you catch the area in which the opponent has deployed powerful units, but in the one-player game you just do not have that. As a two-player game, I imagine, and I have to put the disclaimer there in case it hasn't been clear yet, I haven't tried that version yet. I imagine that it can work. I imagine that it can be a simple introduction to the theme, even though then you have to explain that this is an introduction to what the theme represented, rather than what the author thought that happened at the Alamo. It can be a general picture of the theme. It can be a quick, fun filler. Bluffing game. As a one-player game, it is not one that I found particularly enjoyable, not one that I fell in love with.